Earth was supposed to be a footnote. The Galactic Council chamber brightened as long-dormant coordinates reactivated on the central display, a single star system blinking where there should have been nothing. For 1,000 years, the designation Earth had been marked lost, no emissions, no traffic, no petitions. Civilizations vanished like this all the time, usually quietly. The Council had archived it, closed the file, moved on. Now it was back. Counselors leaned forward as censored data streamed in. One system. No expansion wave. No client states. A small cluster of vessels translating in from interstellar void with none of the graceful energy wakes common to modern fleets. Hulls appeared blunt and layered, scarred by visible seams and external structures. Weapon ports were exposed. Power signatures were dense but inelegant, spiking in mechanical rhythms, rather than smooth harmonic curves. A senior analyst cleared their throat and summarized. 72 ships confirmed, largest mass approximately 15 million tons. Technology profile inconsistent with current council standards. Laughter rippled through the chamber, restrained but genuine. 72 ships, after 1,000 years of silence. One counselor ran a comparison overlay, placing Earth's returning fleet beside a standard council patrol group. The scale difference was almost embarrassing. Another flagged the visible armor plating and labeled it archaic. Someone else noted the continued reliance on kinetic weapon apertures and shook their head. Relics, a delegate said, and the term propagated through the annotation layer. The Council's Combat Advisory AI finished its evaluation and displayed the conclusion without ceremony. Threat index, negligible. Estimated compliance time, under 6 hours. Civilizational classification updated from lost to recoverable. Processing protocols populated automatically. Population containment. Models, resource reclamation forecasts, reintegration labor quotas. Earth's projected population, extrapolated from ancient census data, was listed at 19.6 billion. Give or take decay factors. Obsolete. The word appeared beside the system marker, stamped in cool blue. A minority voice suggested caution, noting the improbability of total survival after a millennium without detectable support infrastructure. The suggestion was overridden by probability curves and precedent. Plenty of species endured in isolation, none returned stronger. The Council had never seen a civilization disappear and reemerge without begging for protection or trade. A visual feed from the nearest Earth vessel resolved briefly before being minimized. The bridge looked utilitarian. No ornamentation. Crew moved with deliberate efficiency, unhurried. Their stations arranged for function rather than spectacle. No attempt was made to open a channel. No greeting broadcast. The ships held position at the edge of Council-recognized space, exactly to 0.7 million kilometers inside the old boundary line. Interesting, a counselor murmured, marking it as a navigational error. Deliberation lasted 12 minutes. That was longer than necessary, but tradition demanded consensus. Reintegration authority was granted. A standard notice of compliance was drafted, citing council law and the benefits of orderly return to galactic society. Military escorts were authorized at minimal readiness. 12% power allocation. Ceremonial posture only. One final annotation scrolled across the display as the order was logged. Probability of resistance, 0.04%. The council chamber settled into routine. The delegates expected capitulation, gratitude, perhaps confusion. They did not expect defiance. They certainly did not expect danger. Earth had been gone too long to matter. As the reintegration notice transmitted toward the returning fleet, the Council classified humanity as a problem already solved. The notice was delivered with ceremonial precision. Council transmitters open. 6 diplomatic bands at once, compressing them into a unified channel designed to impress lesser civilizations with scale and authority. The message was long, formal, and rehearsed citations of Council mandate, historical jurisdiction, and the benefits of orderly reintegration after prolonged absence. Timeframes were included, compliance windows, security assurances. The assumption of obedience was woven so deeply into the language it barely registered as an assumption at all. The human fleet received it without acknowledgement for 27 seconds. When the reply came, it did not use council formatting. It arrived on a narrowband carrier, stripped of ornament, strong enough to override protocol, without spiking aggression thresholds. The visual resolved into a single frame, a human command bridge, functional and subdued, no banners, no emblems, A single officer stood centered, hands clasped behind their back, posture relaxed but immovable. "We have received your notice," the officer said. The voice was steady, unamplified. "Your classification is incorrect." Council delegates exchanged glances. A legal attaché began preparing a clarification response. But the human continued, "Earth is not reintegrating. Earth did not depart unlawfully. Your authority does not extend to us." A murmur spread through the chamber, quickly suppressed. A senior counselor leaned forward and spoke, emphasizing numerical reality is displayed clearly on every tactical board. 12,000 council vessels within response range versus 70 to human ships of obsolete design. The imbalance was stated calmly, as if explaining gravity to a novice species. The human officer inclined their head a fraction. "Your numbers are accurate," they said. "Your conclusion is not." The council escalated to precedent. Lost civilizations were recovered for their own protection. Reintegration prevented instability. Refusal constituted noncompliance and justified enforcement. The human officer listened without interruption, eyes tracking the data scroll as if already familiar with it. When the council finished, the officer responded in short sentences. "We do not accept enforcement. We do not submit personnel for processing. We do not recognize council jurisdiction over human space." "Do not submit." The phrase triggered annotation flags across council systems, marked as anomalous defiance. A delegate demanded to know what authority humanity claimed after 1,000 years of absence. The reply came immediately, "Our own," the officer said. A countdown marker appeared unilaterally on the shared display. 6 hours to compliance. Standard for reintegration operations. The human officer glanced at it once. "You will not reach 0, they said, "and if we proceed," the counselor asked, "then you will initiate hostilities," the officer replied, "and you will lose ships." There was no emphasis, no threat coloring the words, just sequence, cause and effect. The council attempted one final framing, softening tone, offering protectorate status in gradual transition. The human officer waited until the last word rendered. "We are not requesting terms," they said. "We are setting boundaries." The channel paused for a heartbeat. Then the officer added, "Any attempt to board a human vessel will be treated as an act of war." The transmission ended without flourish. Across the void, human ships did not maneuver. They held position, vectors clean, power curves steady. Council tacticians marked the stillness as hesitation, perhaps confusion. Orders queued for a demonstration volley at minimal yield, just enough to remind a forgotten world of its place. The reintegration notice expired unanswered. For the first time in recorded history, the Council's authority had been refused, and the refusal had sounded less like rebellion than a statement of fact. The Council chose instruction over restraint. At 2:11 local engagement time, 3 Council cruisers detached from ceremonial posture and elevated power output to 15%, the minimum required to demonstrate dominance without risking total annihilation of an obsolete target. Energy rays aligned, frequencies tuned to breach modern composite shielding, and fired in synchronized cadence at a range of 19,000 kilometers. The beam struck the lead human vessel dead center. Light washed across its hull in a hard white bloom, saturating sensors and briefly obscuring the ship's silhouette. Council tacticians waited for the familiar sequence: shield flare, harmonic destabilization, catastrophic venting. Instead, the glare faded. The human ship remained, mass intact, vector unchanged. No breach. Damage telemetry populated across Council. Displays installed. Thermal rise registered, then plateaued. Radiation leakage dropped below background levels in 0.9 seconds. Hull integrity remained at 99.98%. The negligible loss attributed to intentional ablative shedding rather than penetration. The ship's power curve did not spike or dip. It stayed flat, stubbornly indifferent. Analysts flagged sensor error. Calibration routines ran automatically and returned clean. A second volley followed, this time from 6 cruisers at 30% output. Frequencies staggered to induce resonance failure. The beams overlapped, saturating the target volume with energy sufficient to cripple a modern battleship twice over. The human hull absorbed it again. Armor plates blackened and peeled away in controlled layers, revealing identical strata beneath. Energy dispersed laterally through internal voids, bled into heat sinks, and vented through structures the Council had misidentified as crude seams. Absorption efficiency stabilized at 93.6%, then corrected upward as more data streamed. HFY 3.6. Council doctrine did not include a response for a target that treated primary weapons as thermal load. Orders escalated automatically. A battleship-class emitter fired at 55%, violating multiple peacetime safety thresholds. The impact lit the battlespace for 3 full seconds, casting hard shadows across nearby hulls. When the light cleared, the human ship was still there. External damage was visible now scoring. Missing plates, exposed superstructure but nothing vital. Internal temperatures peaked and dropped in clean cycles. Crew life signs held steady at 2031, unchanged from pre-impact counts. No evasive burn, no counterfire. The ship endured. They are taking IT. The observation leaked from a junior officer before discipline caught up. It was logged anyway. Flagged as emotional anomaly, Council weapons began to suffer first. At 68% output, 2 cruisers reported emitter degradation. At 72, a third dropped formation to vent plasma, its captain filing a damage report that listed target noncompliance as causal factor. During the pause that followed, long-range plots shifted. 72 human signatures adjusted vectors by fractions of a degree. Acceleration curves rising smoothly from idle to measurable thrust. Distance counters ticked down from 2.7 million kilometers to 2.4. Council tacticians interpreted the movement as retreat preparation. It fit their models. A narrowband transmission cut through the noise, unencrypted and deliberate. It displayed impact graphs, absorption curves, and a single line of text timestamped to the last volley. Efficiency within acceptable parameters. Silence. Followed. The Council authorized one final demonstration strike at 80%. Intent shifting from instruction to enforcement. As capacitors charged, an elder strategist stared at the flattened absorption curve and felt unease settle where certainty had lived. If this was acceptable damage, then the Council had misjudged not just the ship, but the species that built it. Across the void, human vessels continued their slow, deliberate acceleration, armor still steaming faintly as if inviting the Council to continue proving the same point. They did not evade the next strike. They closed the distance. As Council weapons charged toward 80% output, the human fleet's acceleration curves changed from suggestion to commitment. Drives spooled without flare or drama, thrust rising smoothly past thresholds. Council physiology could not survive. Sensors recalibrated twice before accepting the numbers. Sustained acceleration reached 12 grams and held 12 G. At that load, doctrine predicted hull shear and crew loss within seconds. The lead human vessel crossed from 19,000 kilometers to 16,000 in a breath. Vector locked. Profile square to the threat. Life signs remained flat. Inertial compensation held. The ship was not sprinting. It was advancing. Then the rest of the fleet moved. 72 human signatures bloomed across the tactical display, each entering its own acceleration ramp, non-identical. Vectors diverged and converged with deliberate asymmetry, slicing through volumes of Space Council formations reserved for safety margins. The dispersion that had looked like disorganization resolved into a lattice as distances collapsed from millions of kilometers to hundreds of thousands. Council captains ordered corrective maneuvers to preserve elegant arcs. Those orders conflicted almost immediately. One cruiser's adjustment closed a gap another needed to fire. A destroyer rolled to clear a lane and found a human frigate already occupying it, sliding past at relative velocity high enough to shear sensor vanes clean off. Fire control solutions lagged as targeting computers struggled to track profiles that did not pulse or peak, but held steady, relentless. They're coming straight and dotted 12 grams. The humans did not outrun Council weapons. They outran Council assumptions. Engagement envelopes collapsed. Reaction times shrank below safe margins. Energy coherence degraded as ranges fell under 10,000 kilometers. Where beam dispersion increased and dwell times shortened, the Council fired anyway. Lances splashing across space. The human ships no longer occupied. Distance counters ticked down in hard numerals. 12,000 kilometers, 9,800, 7,400. The human fleet threaded gaps measured in tens of kilometers. Timing separations in fractions of a second. No collisions, no hesitation. The battle space lost symmetry as Council formations bent under proximity pressure, forced to choose between colliding with allies or surrendering position. At 4,500 kilometers, the lead human vessel cut thrust and pivoted broadside to 3 Council cruisers at once. The maneuver should have torn the ship apart. It did not. Inertial systems absorbed the vector change. Crew vital state level. Council gunnery solutions updated to late. Beams lancing through vacuum. The ship had already abandoned an elder. Strategists saw the pattern and understood to late. The humans were not breaking formations with fire. They were breaking them with timing. Every acceleration, every cutoff, every fractional degree adjustment forced a reaction. Reactions compounded. Errors stacked. Space shrank at 3,000 to 100 kilometers. The human lattice settled into fiery geometry. Weapon ports iorized open along spines and flanks, dark and unapologetic. Council command vessels found themselves bracketed by converging vectors they could not escape without tearing their own fleet apart. The Council ordered a withdrawal corridor. The order arrived after the geometry had already closed it. The human fleet held acceleration for another 5 seconds, then stabilized. Positions locked with surgical precision. The numbers stopped changing. The outcome did not. They had crossed the last safe kilometer. The first kill was calculated before it was fired. Human fire control did not rush. It waited as vectors converged and distances stabilized inside 3,000 to 100 kilometers. Where probabilities hardened into certainties, Council command vessels struggled to realign, their elegant hulls turning to slowly, trapped by their own escorts and the geometry now hemming them in. Human targeted solutions resolved in quiet cascades, green conformations stacking one after another. Then the railgun spoke. There was no warning glow, no theatrical charge up. 6 tungsten penetrators left the lead battleship's spinal rails at a measured fraction of light speed, timed 0.1 to seconds apart to defeat prediction algorithms calibrated for energy weapons. Council sensors registered impacts before commanders understood firing had begun. The first round punched through layered shielding, ignored decorative superstructure, and exited through the command vessel's core. The second followed the same path with negligible deviation. Internal pressure collapsed. Power grids failed in sequence. 1. The command ship split along stress lines it had never been designed to endure. Its hull peeling open as atmosphere and debris vented into space. Crew life signs dropped from 11,000 to 100 to 0 in under 4 seconds. The wreckage tumbled, inert, still broadcasting a command code no one answered. Missiles followed, launched not in salvos, but in arithmetic. Human destroyers released them and counted. Groups 9, then 9 again, each with distinct guidance logic. Some burned hot and obvious, drawing defensive fire. Others coasted cold, invisible until terminal phase. Council point defenses tracked the loud ones and congratulated themselves as intercept markers flashed green. The quiet missiles arrived untouched at 2,600 kilometers. A second command vessel attempted a desperate roll, exposing its ventral plane. 3 railgun rounds arrived through that opening, spaced to exploit pressure differentials as internal bulkheads failed. A fourth followed milliseconds later, delayed by design. The ship's gravity ring sheared free and continued spinning, intact and useless, while the rest of the hull collapsed inward. TWO. Council admirals shouted for a withdrawal corridor, but the lattice offered none. Human ships occupied the necessary vectors, holding position with calm precision. A third command vessel fired wildly, energy lances splashing across empty space as its gunners tried to force an opening. A human cruiser answered with missiles, carrying limited-yield nuclear charges detonated at calculated standoff distances. The blasts were shaped and directional, tuned to fracture hull integrity and annihilate sensor arrays without vaporizing the ship outright. The vessel went dark, drifting, structure mostly intact. Systems dead. Boarding transponders lit briefly, then went quiet again as human fire control excluded the target. We count before we fire. The phrase appeared on an auxiliary channel, flagged by coalition monitors as a doctrinal artifact. Council analysts barely noticed. Too much was failing at once. Imperial escorts surged to shield remaining leadership ships. But the screen dissolved under kinetic pressure. Railgun fire did not saturate space. It selected. Each shot removed a ship that mattered. Lesser vessels were ignored, allowed to live long enough to understand what was happening. At 1,900 kilometers, a cluster of Council cruisers attempted to ram a human frigate, trading mass for disruption in a maneuver born of panic. The frigate adjusted thrust by 0.4 grams, slid aside, and let the cruisers collide with one another. Human sensors logged the impact as environmental hazard neutralization. No weapons fired. The battle clock ticked past 31 minutes. Council command coherence dropped below 45%. Fleet-wide orders degraded into local guesses. Human losses remained unchanged. 0 destroyed hulls for damaged, none mission killed. Ammunition tallies updated in clean columns. 48 railgun rounds expended, 20 to confirm kills. 3 command vessels erased, 1 disabled for capture. A narrow-band human transmission followed, unencrypted and unemotional. Primary command neutralized. It read, secondary objectives pending. Resistance collapsed unevenly after that. Some council captains fought on until their weapons overheated or their hulls failed. Others powered down and broadcast surrender codes across every frequency they could reach. Human systems acknowledged each automatically, marking surrendered ships green and stripping them from targeting solutions mid-flight. At 38 minutes, the firing stopped, not because the council fleet was gone, but because the arithmetic was finished. Human ships held position, railguns silent, missiles cold. The wreckage of once untouchable flagships drifting between them like solved equations. The guns fell silent. By command, not necessity. At 38 minutes and 0 seconds, every human firing solution cleared at once. Rail capacitors bled charge into sinks. Missile guidance went cold. Across the fractured battle space, council crews waited for the next calculation and did not receive it. Instead, a transmission propagated outward from the human flagship, broad spectrum, and unencrypted, riding military and civilian relays alike until it spilled beyond the system. The image was unchanged. The same human officer, the same functional bridge, no visible triumph. Hostile action is suspended, the officer said. This is a legal transmission. Council commanders braced for terms of eradication. None came. We are evoking interstellar law as recognized by human authority, the officer continued. Data panes unfolded beside the frame definitions, thresholds, statutes rendered with deliberate clarity. First, the practice of sentient slavery is prohibited, effective immediately. Any vessel, installation, or command structure engaged in ownership, transport, or processing of sentient beings is hereby designated a criminal enterprise. Across council hulls, registry alarms triggered as cargo manifests lit up red. Labor holds that had never been questioned appeared on tactical overlays as liabilities. Second, the officer said, surrender is protected. Any ship that powers down offensive systems, transmits standard distress and surrender codes, and holds position will not be fired upon. Boarding actions will be conducted only to secure weapons and render aid. We do not kill prisoners. The phrase propagated across channels and displays, echoed by action. Human targeting systems excluded surrendered vessels without exception. Green markers spread as more council ships powered down, some cautiously, some with visible haste. Fire control solutions peeled away mid-flight and retargeted cleanly. Third, the officer said, there will be trials. The word landed without emphasis. Command authority does not exempt individuals from accountability. Evidence has been recorded. Jurisdiction will be asserted. Sentences will be imposed by courts. A council legal delegate attempted to interrupt, invoking sovereignty in ancient accords. The transmission did not pause. Sovereignty does not extend to enslavement. The officer replied, accords that permitted are void. Numbers scrolled beneath the frame. Estimated enslaved populations identified, 5.1 million. Vessels flagged for seizure, 347. Command personnel designated for detention pending trial, 201. Humanitarian transfer window, 72 hours. Human ships moved again, not toward targets, but toward survivors. Boarding craft launched in controlled intervals. Medics visible through viewports. Weapon safeties engaged. Damage control drones swarmed crippled hulls to stabilize atmospheres and prevent cascading failures. A human destroyer adjusted thrust by 0.2 grams to shield a powerless council cruiser from drifting debris. The officer concluded without flourish, restraint is not hesitation, they said. It is choice. The transmission ended. In the silence that followed, council crews confronted a reality their doctrine had never prepared them for. The battle had not ended because humanity was finished, but because it had decided that killing no longer served the objective. Across the battle space, surrendered ships drifted intact, their crews alive, their futures uncertain but present. Human vessels held position, weapons cold, law now moving where fire had been. The escalation had stopped. The accounting had begun. The explanation did not come from Earth. It surfaced in coalition listening rooms far from the battle, where analysts replayed the engagement frame by frame and found patterns that refused coincidence. Human movements aligned cleanly with forgotten routes. Acceleration profiles matched vectors no modern Navy trained for. The data suggested not improvisation, but rehearsal. Coalition archivists went deeper. They pulled records older than the Council's standard reference set, from probe networks left to decay and libraries no one had in extant centuries. Earth's disappearance appeared again and again not as an extinction event, but as an omission. Trade routes ended cleanly. Traffic logs stopped without panic. Military encounters vanished from after-action summaries as if redacted by habit. Rather than order, they didn't die, a coalition historian said quietly. They withdrew. Sensors confirmed it. Beneath background radiation, long dismissed as noise, human infrastructure revealed itself when the right filters were applied. Fuel depots hollowed into cometary bodies. Ammunition caches buried in dead moons. Repair docks disguised as survey platforms and mining stations. Carbon dating on the oldest structures returned numbers that forced a second pass. Then a third. 1,000 years. The silence had been deliberate. Humanity had stepped out of the galactic conversation and used the time to prepare for threats. The Council did not believe in anymore. Kinetic weapons were not a technological lag. They were a logistics solution. Slugs could be manufactured anywhere. Armor could be repaired without rare fields. Crews could be trained under constant stress. Conditioned for sustained acceleration coalition physiology could not tolerate. This was not a return dot. It was a reappearance dot coalition tacticians overlaid. The recent battle with older incidents unexplained fleet losses. Systems that had gone dark and never been claimed. The signatures matched a well to ignore. Humanity had been enforcing something quietly, far from the Council's gaze. Long before Earth's coordinates reactivated, they were practicing restraint. Someone said, not absence. Political analysts ran projections and found no scenario where humanity's readiness was limited to this system. Supply lines extended across regions the Council had labeled irrelevant. Fleet positions aligned with choke points that would only matter if something worse than imperial overreach existed. The law broadcast, viewed in this context, was not reactive. It was procedural. Coalition channels filled with encrypted traffic as neutral systems reconsidered their alignments. Treaties signed under fear were reopened. Defense budgets shifted. Requests for human legal frameworks appeared, tentative at first, then bolder. The gravity was subtle, but unmistakable dot in the wreckage of Council command. Survivors asked how Earth had grown so strong in silence. Coalition observers had the answer, and it unsettled them more than the battle itself. Humanity had not been racing anyone. It had been waiting beyond the charts and the politics. Beyond the trials already scheduled, coalition sensors continued to watch the outer dark. The same anomalies Earth had prepared for were still there, moving slowly, patiently. 1,000 years of silence had not been emptiness, it had been work. Neutralization resumed without ceremony. Human fire control reclassified every remaining Council vessel in real-time hostile, surrendered, or undecided and acted only on the first. The distinction was absolute. Green-marked ships were excluded even when they drifted across optimal firing lanes. Red-marked ones received no further warnings. Missile bays opened across the human formation. This time, there was no restrained arithmetic. Waves launched in disciplined silence. Hundreds of signatures blooming and vanishing as guidance systems cycled between hot burn and cold coast. The missiles did not converge on a single point. They flowed, dividing and recombining. Saturating volumes of Space Council doctrine had never treated as lethal simultaneously. Point defenses engaged by habit and failed by design. Interceptors chased decoys while real warheads slid through blind arcs, created by earlier panic maneuvers at 6,000 to 100 kilometers. The first cruiser died with engines firing, torn apart by kinetic impact and internal overpressure. At 5,700, another lost power and rolled helplessly, its crew transmitting surrender codes seconds delayed to cancel inbound fire. Already committed by logic gates that did not bargain, human commanders noted the loss and adjusted nothing. The cascade spread. Council captains fought alone now. Command coherence fractured beyond recovery. Some powered down immediately, broadcasting surrender on every channel they could access. Human systems acknowledged each within milliseconds, whole. Markers flipping from red to green as missiles peeled away mid-course and retargeted cleanly. Others hesitated, hoping to survive unnoticed. They did not do not fire on green. The directive pulsed continuously across human channels. It was obeyed even when green-marked ships drifted into perfect firing geometry against still hostile targets. Gunners adjusted, sacrificing efficiency to preserve principle. The choice slowed the neutralization by minutes. No one objected. Boarding actions followed behind the missile waves, not as punishment, but as control. Human cutters approached disabled hulls at relative velocities measured in centimeters per second. Grapples locked. Breach teams entered in pairs, weapons slung low, medics between them. Compartments were sealed rather than cleared. Atmospheres were vented only where resistance persisted. Most resistance ended quickly when power failed and gravity returned at human-set tolerances. At 21 minutes into the phase, a Council carrier attempted a mass launch, dumping strike craft in a desperate bid to overwhelm point defenses. Human response was precise and impersonal. Defense grids engaged not to annihilate, but to corral. Electromagnetic pulses shaped the flow of fighters into narrow cones, frying guidance systems without breaching cockpits. Hundreds of craft tumbled powerless. Pilots alive, instruments dead, recovery beacons activated automatically. Surrender. Cascade. Coalition observers logged the phenomenon as it unfolded. Once a critical mass of Council ships powered down and survived intact, the rest followed. Crews watched neighboring hulls live through surrender and drew conclusions faster than doctrine ever could. At 44 minutes, surrendered vessels outnumbered hostile ones 3-1. At 58, 5-1. The last organized resistance formed around a crippled logistics tender, a cluster of heavy cruisers attempting to build a defensive ring out of habit rather than hope. Human analysis flagged the maneuver as emotionally driven. Missile fire softened the ring without collapsing it. Railgun shots punched precise holes through power cores, and the tender was disabled without rupture. Boarding teams secured it and immediately began evacuating non-combatants. Throughout the engagement, the human flagship held central position, its mass anchoring the geometry. Railguns fired sparingly now, each shot deliberate, removing ships that threatened to destabilize the surrender perimeter. Ammunition tallies updated in clean columns. Missiles expended 338. Railgun rounds 27 additional. Nuclear charges 0 in this phase. Human losses remained unchanged. At 73 minutes, the final hostile marker flickered and went green. The battle space did not erupt in celebration, it simply quieted. Hundreds of Council hulls drifted in ordered clusters, weapons cold, crews waiting. Human ships moved among them like custodians, dispatching repair drones, establishing traffic lanes, preventing collisions between powerless vessels. Boarding tallies stabilized. Prisoners secured for 0.6 million, injured treated for 187,000. Fatalities ceased entirely once the last hostile designation cleared. A Council officer aboard a surrendered cruiser watched a human frigate adjust thrust by 0.1 grams to shield their hull from drifting debris and felt certainly collapse into something else. Not relief, not fear, recognition. The Council fleet had not been annihilated. It had been dismantled decision by decision, vector by vector, until fighting no longer served any purpose. Human command logged the phase complete and shifted focus to humanitarian transfer. At legal processing, violence ended not with exhaustion, but with sufficiency. Mercy followed procedure. Human cutters docked with surrendered hulls according to a queue. That ignored rank and favored need. Atmospheres were stabilized first, then gravity, then medical access. Injured Council crew were triaged without comment. Species tags flashing briefly before dissolving into the same priority schema. Painkillers flowed. Fractures were set. Bleeding stopped. The process was fast, practiced, and conspicuously indifferent. To uniforms. No reprisals. The directive carried the same weight as a fire command. Human Marines escorted prisoners with weapons slung low. Restraints applied only where resistance had already occurred. Those who complied walked unbound. Those who did not were isolated, recorded, and transferred without spectacle. Every interaction generated data, biometrics, testimony. Command lineage fed into a legal system already live and waiting. Temporary detention habitats unfolded from cargo holds, modular and sterile. Nutrition met dietary requirements calculated down to trace elements. Translators rendered instructions in calm, neutral tones. Prisoner counts stabilized at 4.6 million. Fatalities did not increase. The numbers mattered, and the humans treated them like commitments, Across the system, civilian traffic resumed under human advisories. Relief convoys jumped in along pre-cleared vectors, bearing insignia from worlds that had never publicly aligned with Earth. Coalition observers watched the manifests populate and recognized the pattern. Neighboring systems were not waiting to be invited. They were choosing. Declarations arrived in orderly bursts, suspension of council tribute, opening of ports to human oversight, requests for arbitration under the same statutes broadcast earlier. Political gravity shifted not with speeches, but with filings. Authority bled away through paperwork faster than it ever had through force. We accept these terms. The phrase appeared again and again. Identical wording traced back to the law broadcast template. Analysts flagged it as mimetic adoption. Human command did not comment. Trials were scheduled before the last boarding team completed extraction. Jurisdiction packets listed charges with unemotional clarity: enslavement, unlawful processing, command, responsibility, evidence hashes linked to sensor logs, and testimony collected in real time. Command personnel flagged earlier 201 individuals were separated and transferred under guard. That neither tightened when they struggled nor loosened when they pleaded. A council governor attempted to negotiate amnesty in exchange for immediate realignment. The response came from a human legal officer, not a commander. Alignment does not erase crimes, they said. The channel closed. Inside the habitats, rumors spread faster than fear. Crews compared treatment. They noticed that surrender had worked exactly as promised. They noticed that no compartments had been flooded, no reprisals taken for insults shouted in panic, no execution staged to make examples. The lesson settled unevenly, then stayed at 96 hours. The first liberated populations were transferred. Off-seas vessels. Families emerged into gravity they had not chosen, blinking under lights tuned for comfort rather than efficiency. Civilian agencies took over as human medics stepped aside, their role complete. The human flagship remained on station, scarred armor patched with clean plates that did not hide the damage. Its commander filed a final operational note: force applied, compliance achieved, mercy sustained. In distant systems, leaders weighed the cost of defiance against the evidence now flowing through every relay. The choice was no longer theoretical. Humanity had not conquered territory. It had offered an order and demonstrated with meticulous restraint what acceptance looked like when it was real. The system settled into order faster than expected. Debris fields were charted and nudged into decay paths. Traffic lanes reopened. Under human advisories, trial schedules propagated with the same priority once reserved for firing solutions. From a distance, the battlefield looked almost mundane again, as if the violence had been an interruption rather than a revelation. Human sensors did not relax. Deep range arrays continued to sweep beyond the heliopause. Baselines stretched across millions of kilometers, listening for patterns that did not belong. At 118 hours post-engagement, one array returned a signal that refused classification. It was faint, persistent, and wrong. Not a fleet, not a probe, but a distortion that suggested mass in motion without conventional drives. Analysts ran the data. The anomaly held. The source lay beyond the outer rim, tens of thousands of astronomical units distant, approaching on a vector that ignored jump corridors and trade geometry. Its emission profile flickered between states as if the object disagreed with being observed. Cross-referenced against sealed archives, the signature matched fragments of forbidden research and half-erased record civilizations that had vanished so completely their names survived, only as annotations. An exterminator signature, human command, convened without alarms or spectacle. No broadcast interrupted relief operations. The information moved along channels that had existed long before Earth's coordinates reappeared. Contingency headers unlocked. Timelines populated. The numbers were not comforting, but they were familiar. A coalition observer, cleared under emergency protocols, asked a single question over a secure link: is this connected to the Council's defeat? The human reply came after a pause measured in calculation, not hesitation. No, the officer said, it is the reason we're ready. Around the system, human ships adjusted station by fractions of a degree, aligning sensors and mass into a configuration older than the Council's oldest charts. Ammunition tallies updated, training rotation shifted, messages went out to systems that had not yet chosen a side, carrying no threats, only data. Beyond the rim, something ancient continued its approach, indifferent to law, mercy, or surrender. Humanity watched it with the same calm it had shown in empire and began doing the math again.